Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've worked in about 50 different countries, and I've heard probably, I guesstimate, about 5,000 startup pitches now. I just wrote a book last year called Decoding Silicon Valley, The Insider's Guide, because there's a lot of misconceptions and misperceptions about Silicon Valley. What I do primarily is provide a lot of training for startups, mentors, and accelerators, and do a lot of work with governments on their startup ecosystems. So that just gives you kind of a little bit about my perspective. What I'm going to do is tell you just a little bit about what I've seen around the world with respect to startups. I think in general, most of us love entrepreneurs that have that super huge vision about their business. We have a lot of respect for people that can think big, think really creatively. And we also like to think that there's some magic associated with being an entrepreneur. Let's face it, it's really hard to be an entrepreneur. How many of you guys are entrepreneurs? Wow, there's only like 10 hands that went up in the audience. The rest of you guys must need some coffee. We do focus a lot on unicorns, at least in Silicon Valley. And for those of you who don't know what a unicorn is, it's a private company that's valued over $1 billion. And it's unfortunate because the majority of startup entrepreneurs and the majority of successful companies in the world are not unicorns. It's really hard being an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I was about 17 years old. I've had 5 companies, and right now I own 2 companies, Explora International, and then the publishing company I co-own with my co-author. And I know that being an entrepreneur is just really, really tough. So what I want to do is give you sort of the benefit of my background working in Silicon Valley and around the world to kind of give you a little bit of insight into why most startups die from suicide rather than homicide. 90% of startups fail within the first 3 years. That's the sad statistic. And the unfortunate side of it is there's very limited amounts of data available on why startups actually fail. Most of it is self-reported data, meaning an entrepreneur basically will fill out a survey at some point in time, and they will give, numerous reasons or one reason why their company failed. It's really easy for us to find information about when companies start. So business licensing, tax payments, all this kind of stuff associated with when companies are created, all that data is available through a lot of government sources. But when companies fail, it's a lot harder to find that data. So the data that I looked at was self-reported data through CB Insights, through asking a lot of entrepreneurs what the reasons were that they would classify as their failure. So I just want to kind of set the stage that there's not a lot of data available. The fact of the matter is that most of the companies are going to die based on suicide, meaning the decision process or the founder's decision-making within inside the team. Most of it are internal issues rather than external issues. The single biggest reason companies fail is product market fit. So product market fit means that you've got a product the market wants to buy, they're willing to pay for today, and they're satisfied with it. So if you look at all the different aspects of product market fit, there's a number of different factors that go into it, but I would say the umbrella topic is product market fit. So when you're looking at product market fit, is the market large enough? If you're going after a small market, eventually you're going to get to the point where you've sort of reached the point of saturation in the market and there's no more place for you to go. Unless you're selling into a new market, you're selling new products, or you're cross-promoting or cross-marketing, that sort of thing. So product market fit has to do with the market size as well. Not listening to the market. So the market says they want X, and the developers and the technical team are enamored with building Y. That's a process of not listening to what your customers say. About 3 years ago, I met a group of founders in Brazil, and they had a great product for giving tutoring for students. And the challenge was that since they both came out of high school education process, they wanted to focus on the high school student market. But the problem was the market that was coming to them for the tutoring services were corporate employees who wanted to get to the next level of qualifying for a job promotion. And the unfortunate part was these two founders were not listening to what the market had to say. Instead, they were focused on high school students, which were not signing up nor paying for the service, and they ignored the fact that corporate employees were the ones that were buying the product. So that's a question of not listening to the market. There's a lot of exaggeration when it comes to startups. There's a lot of exaggeration in Silicon Valley. A lot of times we talk about products that don't necessarily deliver on their promises. This is definitely falling under the category of product market fit too. A lot of companies run out of money. And when we talk about building a startup, your startup is a temporary state of being. You're trying to find a repeatable and sustainable business model to move you from the startup to the scale up to the whatever growth category. You have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of money, and a lot of companies run out of time and they run out of money. The co-founder of Twitter, Biz Stone, was invited back into the business very recently because Twitter's got a few problems monetizing their business right now. And he says timing, perseverance, and 10 years of trying will eventually make you look like an overnight success. So think about that, 10 years of trying and you're an overnight success. So it really does take a long time to understand your market, to deliver a product that the market wants to pay for today, and then continue selling them products and services that will keep them engaged and loyal to you as a brand. So it does take a lot of time to build. All of you guys know what OSMs are? Nobody knows what an OSM is. An OSM is an oh shit moment. This is when you, as a founder, realize that what you're doing ain't working. And you sit there and you go, oh shit, we are really screwed. This is a normal part of building a startup. This is when you figure out you're either going to turn right or you're going to turn left. Or you're going to stay frozen and paralyzed and not move at all. But this is a normal part of the process of building your startup and finding your market. One of the other problems I find is that when companies or founders make mistakes, make errors, have mini failures, have big failures, whatever you want to call them, they don't rebound quickly enough to get on to the next thing, meaning they're not learning enough about their mistakes and trying to assess them effectively, get outside input on those mistakes so that they can be more effective next time in their decision-making process and obviously avoid that mistake. There are investors in Silicon Valley that will not invest in first-time entrepreneurs. And the reason is because they like entrepreneurs who've been successful or have had failures, because they know that those entrepreneurs are going to be looking very carefully at their previous behavior and never making those mistakes again. They may make other mistakes down the line, but basically there's entrepreneurs that really can internalize the failure process and figure out what does it really mean to them as far as growing their business. So investors like to talk to entrepreneurs about their failures. In the culture in Silicon Valley, we talk about risk, we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about failures. So this part of the open discussion that I find that's more prevalent in Silicon Valley than a lot of other parts of the world, for example. But being able to understand why you failed and be able to articulate that effectively, whatever story you have to tell around it, that rebound process is really, really important. Mentors and advisors are super important to the success of a startup. How many of you entrepreneurs out there right now have what you would consider a mentor, advisor, or coach? Yeah, that's not a lot of hands up in the audience, okay? That's like 3 hands that I saw. Every one of you should be looking for advisors and mentors to help you be smarter about your business decision-making process and be more effective in how you leverage your resources of time, money, and personnel. So I would encourage you to think about who can you be a mentor for and who can be a mentor for you. This part of this whole quid pro quo and helping one another is a really important part of the entrepreneurial journey. So look for mentors, look for advisors, and look for coaches. Surprisingly, founder conflict is not really the highest reason that most companies fail. Again, it's product market fit. I wanted to focus on that initially. But a lot of people think it's founder conflict, meaning they can't figure out what they're going to do. They have problems in the decision-making process. They have issues around authority. They have challenges associated with which markets they're going to go after. But founder conflict is certainly a reason that companies fail, no question about it. Their expertise within the company is not necessarily in the right category, or it's in the wrong location. So market expertise is a core element of product market fit, being able to understand your local market, being able to sell them in terms that make sense for them, in words that communicate and resonate with them emotionally. But the ability to build your team, get that market expertise in the right place at the right time is really, really important. So I've seen a lot of teams that are in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're trying to sell in one market, and their team basically is in another market. So you've got to be looking at where your team is located. Is your expertise in the right place for you to validate the market and sell product? Lots of founders are very, very uncomfortable with the uncertainty of building their company, meaning you can't really predict where you're going to be 6 months from now, let alone 6 weeks from now sometimes. It's really hard as a founder to predict where you're going to go and what you're going to do. So a lot of entrepreneurs are extremely uncomfortable with not knowing what the future holds. And that builds into all the anxiety that comes along with being an entrepreneur. I've actually, in the last 2 weeks, seen a lot more articles around fear, anxiety, panic, et cetera, associated with being an entrepreneur. It made me feel good. Finally, I'm not alone here. You know, it's not just me who's having these anxiety attacks about building my business and trying to figure out, you know, when we're going to close contracts and how we're going to cover payroll. So this is a very common part of the entrepreneurial journey, too. It's not necessarily the direct reason that companies fail, but it is absolutely a contributing factor to your stamina and your life balance and being successful. So if you can't manage your emotional state, it makes it really hard to get up every morning and get done what needs to get done. Some guys just absolutely move too slowly. They miss market opportunities. I've asked a lot of entrepreneurs, when you started your business, did you really ask yourself, is this the right time to start my business? And I just did this survey last week when I was in Lebanon, and there was about 35 people in the room, and not a single person raised their hand and said, oh yeah, of course. I thought about whether or not this was the right time to start my business. So it's strange that people don't ask themselves that question when they're building their business, but how fast you move, whether or not this is the right time, whether or not you should be moving more slowly, more quickly, how do you educate the market? What about if you're bleeding edge technology and people can't really understand how all that fits in to their lives? For example, 21 years ago, I was working on compression, decompression technology that we were using. This was long before Skype. Of course, we had issues associated with the pipe that we're trying to put the data through. So it was way too early for the market. But the fact remains, are you really asking yourself, is this the right time? And how quickly or how slowly should we be moving? Another issue is complete paralysis, meaning it's not working, I don't know what to do. So I'm not getting traction in the marketplace, I'm not selling product, we're not meeting our milestones, our metrics, everything we thought we should be measuring, it's not working. And I've seen so many entrepreneurs that just absolutely freeze and don't necessarily know what to do. So the decision-making process of whether you continue persevering and building your business or if it's time to pivot, I get this question all the time. How do I know, Michelle, when it's the right time to pivot? And in reality, the answer is only up to the founders. They're the only ones who really know when the right time is. And this is a really hard decision to make. I worked with a Brazilian company about 5 years ago, and at the end of the acceleration process, about 12 or 18 months later, they had not gotten the kind of traction they had expected to get. But they took a really methodical approach to assessing and analyzing whether or not they were doing things right or doing things wrong. They got in touch with all their clients. They asked them lots of questions. And then they got in touch with a whole bunch of advisors and mentors in the market and said, here's our data. This is what we found out from our clients and our non-clients. And how should we interpret this data? So they spent a lot of time figuring out, what was the right thing for them to do. Did they need to make some substantive changes to their business model, to their target market, how they were going to approach the market, the service and support that they delivered to the market? In the end, after many, many months of analyses, they figured out that there was no way for them to pivot effectively with the technology base that they had in place, and there was really no success at the end of the process of persevering for another X number of months. So they shut down the company. But at least they took a very methodical approach to figuring out whether or not a pivot was even in their future. So this is a decision-making process that I have found with founders that's really, really difficult. And I recommend that founders always find mentors and advisors to help guide them through this process, or at least ask the entrepreneurs some really good questions so you can come up with what makes the most sense for you. After all, it's your business and nobody's going to make the decisions for you. How many of you guys are entrepreneurs? I'm going to ask you again. Raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur. Man, there's still so few hands going up. How many of you guys are in sales? Okay, that's more hands, okay? If you're an entrepreneur and you're in sales, right? Communication skills are a really important aspect of recruiting founders, recruiting employees, finding customers, selling customers on your grand vision, even though your product is this small, the vision for the product is that small. So the ability to communicate with customers and prospects is really, really important as well. And I find not enough time and attention is placed on the communication skills of entrepreneurs so that they can be successful articulating their message in the market. It's hard selling. It's hard to close a deal. It's harder sometimes just to get the door open to get that meeting. It's hard to craft an email to get somebody's attention. It's hard to leave the right kind of voicemail if you guys still use your phones. All these things are very difficult, but the challenge really is if you can master these and be like, say, Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, who took a lot of acting classes so that he could effectively energize and engage his audience and really develop this sort of evangelical links with his customers, I think you can be a lot more successful. So sales skills are really, really important to founders. Being able to scale effectively is critical as well. I know a team of founders in Latin America. They were selling products to restaurants, and their first market was a particular, it was in Mexico City. And their approach in the sales process was the two of them went to each one of these restaurants, and they sat and talked to the owner of the restaurant and tried to sell them the technology. So once they closed that sale, they went to the next restaurant and did the same thing. So that was not a scalable model, considering in the city where they were working, there was over 16,000 restaurants. This is in Mexico City. So they didn't really have the ability to scale effectively. And they really didn't think when they built their business about what scaling really meant and what it was really going to cost them from a long-term perspective. So being able to scale effectively is a key reason that companies are successful. And if you can't scale and you can't scale effectively, it's another reason why you're going to fail. So there's no straight lines to success. If somebody tells you it was a very clean line, let's see, I built my business over my kitchen table in Copenhagen, and then we moved to Silicon Valley. This is a true story, by the way. We moved to Silicon Valley about 9 months later. We built the business there, and we took investor money, and we raised lots of money, and we hired 250 people, and the business was going very, very well. And then one day, about 6 years later, we got an offer to be acquired. So we sold the business, and everybody worked out their agreements with the company. The founders stayed with the acquirer for 6 months and what have you. Then we walked away with a bunch of money in our pocket, and we went back to Denmark, and we told this story about, we built our business over a kitchen table in Copenhagen. We went to Silicon Valley. 6 years later, we sold the business for $250 million, and then we went back to Denmark. And everybody in Denmark thought, shit, I am so stupid, man. I am having all these problems building my business, and I don't understand why these guys had this like straight line to success. It's never a straight line. It's always difficult. It's always complicated. So if it sounds too easy, it is. The end of the story basically is that you're going to find your way to success. There's lots of different definitions of success. You're going to learn a lot of things along the way. Be appreciative of the journey, all the people that you meet, all the cool experiences that you have, and I'll be a resource to you if there's anything I can do. Thank you very much. So, do you guys have any questions about failure, about startups, about the worst things I've ever seen? No question.
Let's do it. There's a question right there.
So a very short question. What would you say about startups on that zero stage? I mean, 3 guys, no money. There is a need to muster up motivation to build that more or less sellable MVP, etc. How to persevere at that 0 point?
That's hard. It's hard because there's no money. You're all motivated to be successful. I think part of the process can be made a lot easier if you find a mentor or an advisor that you can bounce ideas off and ask whether or not what we're doing right now is a normal part of the process. What are some of the things that we may be experiencing in the short term? And then to help figure out what are the ways you can get stuff done with no money. I know a lot of startups that bring on interns that want certain kinds of experience and are willing to work for free. My daughter's just finishing her first year of college, and she said, Mom, I want to work as an intern at a specific company. I said, well, are they going to pay you? And she goes, no, Mom, I want the experience. So you've got to be looking at where and how you can find ways to get stuff done with no money. But I would highly recommend that you develop a support network of entrepreneurs and mentors that can help you in the process. Because let's face it, it's hard. It can be very depressing. And getting the energy up every morning to go to work is very challenging.
Okay, so another question.
Another question back there.
Yeah. Thank you, really great presentation and speech. My question is about Lithuania. What do you think about Lithuania startup scene here locally, and how in your circles, do people know how active we are here, and is it important at all to have a company based in US, UK or Western Europe, or 3 guys from Lithuania like just here can achieve the same results?
Okay, that sounds like 5 questions. But the first thing is, what do I think of Lithuania? First off, I've never been to a startup festival that's outdoors underneath the trees. So that's pretty cool. It beats convention center and fluorescent lights any day of the week. Second thing is, how important is it to go to the US? So I guess the question I would put back to you is, what is your objective of even thinking about the US market? Do you think that there's a market there for your product or service? And if you do, how much research and development, market validation have you done with people that are there? Meaning, have you used Skype and Google Hangouts, et cetera, to talk to lots of people there to figure out whether or not they have a problem and whether or not you can solve it? With respect to the entrepreneurs that I've met so far in Lithuania, I would say that you guys got it going on. There's some seriously smart people here with some really interesting ideas. I talked to a couple of the companies here on the Startup Alley earlier. So I think that Lithuania can compete on the global scale regardless. The question is how do you want to be successful in the sense of, do you want to develop a cluster of vertically focused companies that work together or that develop specific expertise in certain categories? That's always something that I recommend to countries, is to look at whether or not you've got some deep expertise in certain subjects and that you can take and leverage that worldwide to develop some branding and reputation around it. The last part is sort of a question in there, but not really, is the visibility of Lithuania in Silicon Valley. So there is visibility for Lithuania in Silicon Valley. There have been some road shows, there have been some startup demo days, things like that. So there is much more visibility for the country than ever before. I think the advantage of Silicon Valley is that half the population is born in another country and everybody goes there. So it's not unusual to find somebody from Armenia or Bogota, Colombia, or Argentina or Lithuania. So there are opportunities worldwide. The question really becomes, what are you really good at? Is there a market out there for what you're doing, and is your customer willing to pay money for it today?